My name is Amy Garfinkel. I'm the Farm to School Network Lead with the California Department of Food and Agriculture, Office of Farm to Fork on the Farm to School program team. And I'm joined by my wonderful colleagues, Michael and Rachel, who are also on the call. And you may be wondering where Nick is, our amazing Farm to School program manager. He's out of the office today, so our team is going to carry on. And hopefully we can answer your questions and help you learn more about this grant program today. We're so excited to be with you on this call. Next slide. So to get started, I'm just going to give an about 10 to 15 minute overview of the grant program. And then the majority of the time is going to be just for live open Q&A. So if you have questions about the grant program, if questions come up throughout this call, we're really excited to hear your questions during the Q&A. So before that piece, I just want to give an overview of how our office approaches this grant program. So the first thing is we have some guiding questions that we like to ask ourselves, not only throughout the development of the grant program, but also throughout the whole implementation. We like to ask, how can we simplify this program? How can we help applicants and grant recipients? We love Farm to School, we want to help. How can we celebrate and validate the impacts you're making, the wonderful work that you're doing, and how can we create lasting impact together so that Farm to School thrives for many, many years to come? And then we also have some guiding practices. So our team provides support and technical assistance for Farm to School projects. We're here to help. We also have office hours and peer-to-peer learning opportunities for grant recipients. So right now, office hours are very casual over Zoom for grant recipients to come if they would like to. It's totally optional to share and learn from one another. And then we also try to facilitate cross-pollinating across programs throughout the state. So if there's a project that's really exciting in the northern part of the state, and they might have a lot in common and a lot to share with and learn from a project in the southern part of the state, then we want to help make those connections and help you meet each other and collaborate and learn from one another. So that's a little background about the culture of support and collaboration we try to create. And we're always very open to suggestions about how to make this grant program and this community and this process better to help advance and enhance Farm to School in California. Next slide, please. So now a little bit more into the details of the grant program. These are the purpose and priorities for the Farm to School Incubator grant program in 2022. And these appear throughout all 4 funding tracks and throughout the applications and review criteria for each track. So the overarching purpose of the program is to award competitive grants to support projects that do 4 things: that cultivate equity, nurture students, build climate resilience, and create scalable and sustainable change. And then within that, we have this list of 5 funding priorities. And if you've taken a look through the review criteria and the application, these probably look familiar. They're embedded within each application and the scoring. So the first funding priority is to engage students from underserved communities, and there's a definition for what that means in the request for applications. The second funding priority is to serve schools located among priority populations that are especially vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And the applications link to a map that you can use to help determine that. The third funding priority is to include small to mid-sized California food producers in the project. The fourth is to include veteran California food producers, socially disadvantaged California food producers, and/or limited resource farm households in California. And the fifth is to include California food producers who utilize climate-smart agricultural practices, climate-smart agriculture production systems like certified organic or transitioning to certified organic, or other regenerative strategies that increase resilience to climate change, improve the health of communities and soil, protect water and air quality, increase biodiversity, and help store carbon in the soil. So these will come up throughout the application, and the scorecards allocate additional points for these funding priorities in the applications. Next slide, please. So these are the 4 funding tracks. The first is the Farm to School K-12 Procurement and Education Grant. The second is the Farm to School Partnership Grant. The third is the Farm to Early Care and Education Grant. And the fourth is the Farm to School Producer Grant. Tracks 3 and 4 are new this year. And we're really excited about all 4 of these tracks. And 2 common questions we get are, 1, can we apply to multiple tracks? The answer is yes, definitely. If you are eligible to apply to multiple tracks and you're interested, you can absolutely do that. And the second question is, if we received a grant award last year, can we reapply? And the answer is also yes, you are welcome to reapply this year. Next slide, please. So here's our brief agenda for the webinar today. I'm going to give a very short overview of each funding track to give you a sense of what they look like. Then we're going to go over a program timeline. And then the rest of the time is just going to be for open live Q&A, and we welcome your questions. And then if you would like to view a recording of a more comprehensive overview of the grant program, there is a recording on our website, and you can follow that URL. And we gave maybe more of about 45-minute overview of the grant program, going through the PowerPoint slides that are posted on the website. Okay, next slide. So track 1, the Farm to School K-12 Procurement and Education Grant, it will fund individual public school districts, county offices of education, and directly funded charter schools in California to establish new or expand existing farm to school programs that do, and this is important, they should do both of these first 2 things. So they should, 1, coordinate the school nutrition services program with educational opportunities for students in cafeterias, classrooms, and/or outdoor learning spaces. And they should also do, 2, procure California grown or produced whole or minimally processed foods for incorporation into school meals, especially foods that are culturally relevant, climate smart, and from small to mid-sized food producers, veteran food producers, socially disadvantaged food producers, and/or limited resource farm households in California, which may look familiar from the funding priorities that we went over in the beginning. And then 3, this is optional. It's not required for track 1, but if desired, projects can employ farm to school staff and/or offer farm to school professional development for staff with grant funds. And then this is the only track that has a funding formula. So to figure out how much you can apply for in track 1, if you're a public school district, county office of ed, or directly funded charter school, you just take the number of students enrolled in your district in the 2019 to 2020 school year, and you multiply it by $10. And then once you have that number, if it's less than 150,000, you can apply for up to 150,000. However, if it's more than $1 million, you are limited to apply for $1 million. And then if your funding formula is anywhere between 150,000 to $1 million, you can apply for up to the result of your funding formula. So basically the maximum is $1 million for larger districts, and smaller districts can apply for up to 150,000 regardless of what the funding formula says. And other than that, you can apply for up to your funding formula's result. And feel free to ask questions about this funding formula later. Hopefully I didn't make it more confusing. Next slide, please. So for track 1, this is a very brief overview of the scorecard. So this tells you how many points are available for each category of the application. And if you would like to look in more detail at the review criteria for each track, on the website, there is a section called Application Questions and Review Criteria, and there's a separate document for each funding track that goes pretty much question by question and tells you how the scoring will work for each section of the application. But in terms of an overview, the majority of the points in track 1 are going to be for community need. So who are you serving? And then the second highest points will be going to project description. And the third highest points will be going to the healthy, equitable, and resilient food system category. And these scoring categories are going to reflect those funding priorities that we talked about earlier on in this session. And then there's also a big chunk of points for project viability, which is your budget and sustainability plan, as well as for description of farm to school history and motivation and your project team. All right, next slide. So now we're speeding through. This is track 2, the Farm to School Partnership Grant. So for this one, it will fund regional and statewide farm to school partnerships in California to establish new or expand existing farm to school initiatives that do any one or more of these 3 things. So for track 2, it can do one or more of the things in this list. It does not have to do all of them. The first option is to implement farm to school procurement and or education strategies as part of a larger regional or statewide food system development plan. So if your region of the state has been working on a food system plan for your community and farm to school is an element of that, then you can apply to track 2 as a partnership to implement those farm to school strategies, whether it's procurement and or education, as part of that larger overarching regional plan. The second option for track 2 is to increase collaboration and coordination regionally or statewide between California food producers and school nutrition services departments to increase procurement of California grown or produced whole or minimally processed foods for incorporation into school meals, especially foods that are culturally relevant, climate smart, and from these priority producer populations from the funding priorities. The third option for track 2 is to provide farm to school procurement and or education technical assistance or capacity building support regionally or statewide to more than one farm to school implementing organization. And the way we define a farm to school implementing org is a public school district, county office of education, or directly funded charter school. So those are the elements that track 2 projects can incorporate. And for this track, there's no funding formula. It's just a range from 100,000 to 500,000, and you apply for what you need within that range. Next slide. So here's the scoring for track 2. It probably looks familiar. It's very, very similar to track 1. So the biggest scoring category is community need. Other big scoring categories are project description and healthy, equitable, resilient food system. And then there's also points for your budget, your sustainability plan, your project partners, and your description of farm to school history and motivation. And within that, the scoring reflects those funding priorities on the right-hand side that we discussed earlier. And again, if you'd like to see the full review criteria for track 2, you can check that out on the website. Next slide. All right, halfway through. So track 3 is the Farm to Early Care and Education, or Farm to ECE grant. And this track will fund childcare centers in California and Farm to ECE support organizations to establish new or expand existing Farm to ECE programs that do all 3 of these first 3 things in the list. So they should, 1, coordinate food and garden-based hands-on learning and play opportunities for young children, and if desired, for their families. And they should, 2, procure California grown or produced whole or minimally processed foods to incorporate into meals, snacks, taste tests, and or food boxes for young children, especially foods that are culturally relevant, climate smart, and from these priority producer populations. And number 3, track 3 projects should also offer Farm to ECE technical assistance and or peer learning spaces to ECE staff, ECE teachers, and or ECE families, which could include workshops, trainings, etc. And then similarly to track 1, this last point in the list is not required, but you're welcome to do so if you would like to in track 3. And that's to, if desired, employ Farm to ECE staff. And then we have this line at the bottom, hopefully it's not too small, but it says, the CDFA encourages track 3 projects to incorporate parent or family engagement and to build connections with K-12 and the Child and Adult Care Food Program. And then for this one, there's no funding formula. The award amounts are $50,000 to $200,000, and you apply for what you need within that range for your project. All right, next slide. Okay, so again, this scorecard probably looks very familiar, and it is very similar tracks 1 and 2. And again, the full scorecard with all of the review criteria for track 3 is available on our website. So for all of the tracks, we recommend taking a look at that review criteria as you're developing your application, because that's what the scoring will be based on. So that can help you to develop a competitive application. Okay, next slide. All right, I'm almost done talking, and then it's time for Q&A. Thanks for hanging in there with me. So track 4, our 4th and final track, it's the Farm to School Producer Grant. Track 4 will fund California food producers to increase production, processing, and or distribution of whole or minimally processed foods for the school food market. Track 4 will also fund California food producers to provide hands-on educational opportunities for youth that complement their food sales or donations to schools. And to be eligible, a producer must show evidence of an established relationship with at least one school nutrition services department. And producers can do that in the application through a letter of intent from at least one school nutrition services director. And we have a template for that letter of intent for producers to use. And then if a producer does not have an established relationship yet with the school nutrition services department, we would love for you to still reach out to us, because Michael, my colleague on our team, can help you to build relationships with school nutrition services departments and learn more about how to access the school food market. So please reach out to us if you would like to explore building a relationship with school nutrition. And that is free, non-competitive technical assistance that our office and Michael can offer. But if you do have an established relationship with at least one school nutrition services department and you're a producer, then we welcome you to apply in track 4. And the award amount for track 4 is $5,000 to $150,000, and you apply for what you need for your project within that range. All right, next slide. So this scorecard is a little different from the other 3. For one, it's out of 55 points instead of 100 points, and the application sections are a bit different. So the biggest scoring category is healthy, equitable, resilient food system. This section reflects a lot of those funding priorities in the right-hand side that we talked about at the beginning. There's also a lot of points for project description, a fair amount of points for project viability, the budget and sustainability plan, and then also points for the strength of relationships with school nutrition services departments, as well as your description of food production history and your farm to school vision for your operation. Next slide. Okay, so those are the 4 funding tracks. And then for the program timeline, the application period opened on May 9th. So it's been, gosh, I guess almost a month, maybe 3 weeks. That's amazing. Time flies by. Throughout the application period, we're doing these weekly webinars. So this is our 4th one. We have several more to go over the next few weeks. So you can feel free to register for those whenever you have questions, and we'd love to see you again. Applications are due by July 6th by 5 p.m. Pacific time. So that's a good date and time to keep in mind and make note of maybe in your calendar. July through August 2022 is when we'll be doing the review process. So the review process consists of 2 phases. The first is our CDFA team doing initial administrative review of applications to make sure that they meet eligibility and application requirements. And then applications that pass those requirements move on to an external technical review. And those are reviewers from across the country with expertise in farm to school. And they'll be reviewing and scoring applications based on that review criteria that's posted online. And then in September is when we anticipate announcing awards and notifying applicants about the results. And then September through December is when we will be working with grant recipients to establish grant agreements and working with you to do all of that paperwork. And then we estimate that December 1st, 2022 is when projects may start. And it's a maximum of a 2-year grant term. So then projects must end by November 30th, 2024. So that's the program timeline. And to apply, you apply in an online grant application portal called WiseHive. And there's a different application portal for each funding track. And Rachel can put the links to those portals in the chat so that you can access them. And we also have a short video about how to navigate the WiseHive system and how to set up an account if you're curious for guidance there. And thank you, Rachel. And that's it. Next slide, please. So we added this slide in just so that we can share with you how we're able to help our CDFA team during the app period and how we're not able to help during the application period. So the ways our CDFA team can help is we can answer informational questions about the grant via email and via these weekly webinars. Our email will be on the next slide. It's cafarmtoschool@cdfa.ca.gov. We welcome you to email questions anytime, and we welcome you to come to these weekly webinars where we can see you and talk to you live. And then the second thing we can do to help is we can introduce producers and schools or support organizations to each other if you're looking for those connections. And the third is we can provide technical support for the online application portal WiseHive. So if you're experiencing any challenges with that, or if things come up and you need support navigating that system, we can assist there. And then the ways we cannot help are we cannot provide specific feedback on grant project ideas. And this is because we have to ensure that this grant application process is the competitive process for all. And the second thing we can't do kind of in that vein is we can't assist with writing grant applications. All right, next slide. So that's enough of me talking at you. That's our brief overview of the program. And now we're going to move into the live Q&A. So excited to hear your questions. Feel free to raise your hand using the raise hand function, where you go to more, or no, sorry, you go to reactions and then raise hand. And I see Caitlin, your hand's up, so I'll call on you in a second. Thank you. And you can also put your question in the chat. And I'm gonna go through raised hands first, and then we'll go through the chat. So yes, let's get started. Caitlin, hi.
Hi, thanks for putting this together. I appreciate it. So 2 short questions. One is, you said it's a maximum 2-year grant term. As we write the application, is that what you prefer? You want us to have a 2-year timeline, or is something shorter also okay?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, it's the latter. So the grant term is up to 2 years. So you can have up to 24 months to implement the project. But if you would prefer to do it in a shorter amount of time within those 2 years, you're welcome to.
Okay, and then the follow-on to that is, so is this expected to be a recurring grant program, so that if we did want to do something this year and say we want a 1-year project, can we reliably count on it being, again, next year we could try to reapply for the same project?
That's also a great question. So right now, this grant program is one-time funding. It's not permanent funding. So there was the pilot round of funding was last year. There was $8.5 million that went to 60 projects across the state. This year, it's $30 million, and $25.5 million is available for grant projects throughout the state. And then next year, we know for sure that next year there will be another $30 million for a 3rd round of the grant program. And beyond that, we don't know if there will be more funding for the grant program. But that's a really great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Caitlin. And now I see Curtis. Let's go to you. Hi, Curtis.
Just taking myself off mute. So I actually mailed this question in late Friday, and part of my question, one of my colleagues actually said, someone said to ignore what was actually in the NOFA, and the question revolves, it's around track 4, and the phrase that we're hanging up right now is a person, group of individuals, nonprofit or tribal government that leases, rents, or owns land in California. So our specific project is a it's covered by a formal MOU among the school, a agricultural and a nonprofit. The school actually owns the land. The applicant would be the nonprofit, but we're hung up on the phrase. I mean, our MOU doesn't provide a lease, or we're not making a rent payment. It's a formal partnership. We're producing about 200,000 pounds of produce every year.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, that's a great question. So yes, for track 4, it's true that a school district with a farm itself couldn't apply in track 4, but we did want to leave room for applications from, if there is like an individual food producer or a nonprofit that is the one operating the farm on school district property, then they could be the ones to apply. So we might have to take a look at that language to fully answer your question.
Because that's essentially our situation. It's a formal partnership. You know, some of the food was going into food services before the pandemic, so a small amount. But anyway, yeah, it's just, yeah, school districts are not eligible to apply. However, a food producer. So in essence, the partnership is the food producer. So it's a very strange situation. And again, someone would ask a related question: is, oh, just ignore the issue on rent or lease. But I would be afraid that an auditor would come on through and say, wait a second, you were not eligible. Why the state had no right to award? So I don't know how we address that. I mean, obviously we could go back to the school district. We could go back to the school district and formally amend the MOU to put in some sort of $1 a year lease, but trying to do that in this short amount of time during the summer would be really difficult.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And that's a clarification we'll definitely get to you so that you know before you apply. And we'll try to get that to you as quickly as possible. But I think it's something we're going to have to discuss as a team first. But it sounds like it's just that language. You're wondering, does it have to be leasing or renting, or can it be a formal MOU where the nonprofit is the one operating the farm, and can the nonprofit apply?
Yeah, it's a 3-way partnership: Solutions for Urban Agriculture, CAPOC, and the school itself. So it's all 3 of us. So running an 8-acre farm.
Okay. Okay. Well, yes.
You have the question in writing, so yeah, you can. Any other additional information, just email me back and see what we can do. Because and the solution is not to say, oh, just go through track 1, because that means then you're trying to do a district wide that covers like 6 high schools, and it gets really messy.
Okay. Well, yeah, we'll definitely get back to you via email. And then for anyone else on the call who's interested in that answer, we'll be posting it in our weekly Q&A, so you'll be able to check out the response there on our website. And then Curtis, the other thing you mentioned about all the schools in the district. So for track 1, a project does not have to serve all schools within a school district. There is a spot in the track 1 application where an applicant can write in if the project will be serving specific schools rather than all schools in the district, and then to just kind of explain why and to chat about that. So it would be possible for a track 1 application to be serving some of the schools in a district. But
the district is an eligible applicant. A nonprofit is not an eligible applicant.
Correct. Yes, for track 1.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Curtis. Yeah, and thanks for your patience. We'll make sure to get back to you on that one. It's a good question. Okay. It's always a good question when it stumps me. But yeah, we'll get back to you. Lainey, I see your hand up. Let's go to you.
Thanks, Amy. So we're actually applying for track 1 grant and a track 2 grant because our program is becoming a nonprofit. So we were curious because we're such a huge school district that serves so many schools that whether it matters if as a track 2 applicant, you're partnering with just one school district versus more. Like, does it harm you if you don't have more than one school district partner or farm to school implementing organization that you're partnering with?
That's a really good question. So for track 2, in terms of your project partnership, when you actually go to apply and submit your application, the minimum requirement is to have at least one farm to school support organization, which could be a nonprofit organization as well as other types of orgs, and to have at least one farm to school implementing organization, which would be a school district, county office of ed, or directly funded charter school. So in order to apply, that's the minimum requirement for your project partnership is, say, for example, a nonprofit and a school district. But then there's this important piece of track 2 where the project needs to focus on having regional or statewide food system impact that meaningfully supports more than one farm to school implementing organization, which would be at least, one public school district, county office of ed, or directly funded charter school. So that meaningfully supports part is really important as you're writing your track 2 application. Even if the only one school district is formally part of your project partnership, to make sure that a track 2 project is having a meaningful impact on more than one farm to school implementing organization. And in the track 2 review criteria document that you can find on the website, you'll see that this, I forget the number of the question, but it's the project description section of the application under project narrative. And part of the scoring is looking at if the applicant clearly demonstrates that their project is going to have regional or statewide impact that meaningfully supports more than one farm to school implementing organization, and what the scale of that impact will be. So track 2, the thing to keep in mind is that it's, it's this regional or statewide focus, whereas track 1 is on an individual district community.
Okay. Got it. And is regional defined in any particular way, like county-wide, or is there an objective criteria about that?
That's also a really good question. The answer is no. We don't define what regional means for this grant program. So it's up to you as the applicant to determine what that means to you. And for us in the scoring criteria, it's really just looking at, is the project going to meaningfully support more than one farm to school implementing org? And then beyond that, you're defining what regional means to you.
Okay. Thank you, Amy.
Yeah. Thanks, Lainey. Nice to see you.
You too.
And Jessica, hi, welcome.
Hi there, Amy. So I am applying for track 1 for a directly funded charter school. We have been running a part-time garden classroom for our 17-bed garden that we run at our school. And so what I'm wondering is, if we want to expand that program, does the priorities where we talk about where we need to coordinate with our nutrition food services program, is it okay if we coordinate with how the food's being used in the garden classroom, or does the food need to be coordinated into the school meals that we use from our school garden?
That's a really great question. So yes, for that first component of track 1, where it's talking about coordinating the school nutrition services program with farm to school education, that the farm to school education piece could absolutely include an outdoor garden classroom. That sounds wonderful. But then you would need to be showing how you're coordinating that with the school nutrition services program. It doesn't necessarily mean that the food that students are growing in the garden goes to the cafeteria, but there does have to be coordination there. However, you kind of define that so that because our focus is like, how do we integrate farm to school procurement with farm to school education, so that when students are going to school, they're just like really understanding this whole food system, and it's like helping to transform their relationship with food. So that coordination piece would need to be there, but we don't require exactly how that coordination occurs.
Okay, perfect. That makes sense. And then the other part of the track one says that we need to procure California grown or produced foods. Does that count if that food comes from our school garden, or do we need to partner with a farm?
Yeah, if that's how you prefer to do it, you can absolutely procure from your own garden or farm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that school garden is considered the farm in this scenario. Is that correct?
Ooh, that's a good question that has come up before. Yeah, because there's a section of the application called Healthy, Equitable, Resilient Food System, and it's asking you about like, is the operation at least 50% owned by, and then it has a list of types of producers. Yeah. So I think for that one, we've been struggling with if a school garden or school farm, like if you'd be able to like determine if that criteria applies to a school garden or farm. So
yes. I didn't know how to respond to that question either. So that is
yeah. So I think that's also one we're gonna have to kind of marinate on a bit and get back to you all about. Because it is true that the way this grant program defines a food producer is the definition Curtis was mentioning before, which is and hopefully I get this right, but it's a person, a group of individuals, a nonprofit, or a tribal government entity that leases, rents, or owns land in California, and that grows crops, raises livestock, or uses indigenous food production practices on that land. So we'll have to do some thinking on like if a school garden or school farm would fit into that. And yeah, so we'll get back to you over email, and for everyone else, we'll post it on the website, because that's a really good question that really makes us think. Yeah. Okay,
and that actually brings me back to real quick. I'm almost done. The question that asks, is farm to school new at our school? Would that be? I mean, it's not new because we've been doing it for the last year. So would that be no? Because we've been doing a similar program.
Great question. Yeah, so for everyone else on the call, that's question 13 in the track one application. And question 13 is simply asking you, is farm to school new to your organization, yes or no? That question is not scored. So whether you answer yes or no, either answer is totally welcome. And based on your answer to question 13, the question in question 14 will, the wording will slightly change. So gotcha. Yes, and then question 14 is the one that's scored, and it's just kind of based on your explanation of what kind of farm to school or school nutrition or youth engagement work you've been doing. But you're not actually getting scored on if you have a history of farm to school or not. We're just curious.
Thank you very much, Amy, for answering those questions. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jessica. Those are great questions. And Julie, let's go to you.
Hi, thank you, Amy, for hosting this today. It's super helpful.
Yay.
So I am working with both producers and schools. And a question that has come up is hydroponics. And I'm wondering if that's something that this program would fund, or if you're really focused more on soil-based farming.
Oh, totally. Yeah, hydroponics is welcome. As long as everything is tied into farm to school, then it's totally welcome. Any type of food production. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. And Samantha, I see your hand. Oops, you might be muted still.
Can you hear me?
I can, yes.
Oh, good. Thank you. Very briefly, I really want to be respectful of the rest of the team that obviously is very experienced, and I'm more of a new person here. So I have just some clarification, and my apologies in advance if it's repetitious, but there's a lot to learn, and maximizing our success it's vital to me to understand the terms and the definitions. And I've gone through the website. Is there more of a training and recordings, kind of a library that we can go to understand and to kind of ensure more of a success?
That's a great question. So I would point you to two possible resources that might be helpful. And Rachel, maybe you can help me out with putting the links in the chat at some point. But the first is the summaries of projects that received funding last year. So
Excellent.
we have this document that has a paragraph about all 60 projects that received
Nice.
funding last year. And last year there were tracks 1 and 2. So you can see projects that were like school districts that got funded for their individual district community, and regional partnerships that got funded. So that can provide some fun inspiration. Actually, I thought of a few more resources. So that's the first one. And then the second one is, if you're not already, to subscribe to our California Farm to School Network newsletter. And that gets sent out monthly, and it often includes highlights from farm to school projects and wonderful farm to school activities happening throughout the state. So that can provide some inspiration. Similarly, if you prefer social media to a newsletter, we have a farm to school Instagram, which is at CA Farm to School. So you can check out some highlights from projects there too. And then the other resource is, gosh, was this back in 2021? I think we had a virtual farm to school conference. And so there are various sessions that we recorded and posted on a standalone farm to school conference webpage. So that can be an interesting thing too to explore, to learn more about farm to school and
how would we access that? Or
so there's great question. There's a URL for that website, and thank you, Rachel. Rachel just put it into the chat.
Nice. Oh,
at the very bottom.
Nice.
Yeah, so that
I'll
can
take
be
a picture
a
with
fun
my
link
iPhone.
Oh, perfect.
and then just very quickly, you referred to a couple of other webinars that have already taken place. By any chance, were those recorded?
Great question. Yes, we're recording all of these weekly webinars throughout the grant period and posting them on our website. So the first one that was on May 12th that had the longer overview of the program, that recording is already up on the website. And then the recordings from weeks 2 and 3, those are not yet posted, but will be very soon. And then
those just got posted a minute ago, so those are officially live now.
Nice. Woohoo! Woohoo, education.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you, Rachel.
And then similarly, we'll be posting this one once we get the recording together, and same for the upcoming webinars. So you'll be able to refer back to the questions and answers if you're not able to make it yourself.
I love it. That's so perfect. And I really thank you, Amy, and your team. It's all very good and making positive change we want to see in the world. So thank you so much.
Oh, yay. Thank you so much. We're excited about this program. Thanks for coming. And Trish, I see your hand. Thanks for waiting.
Hi. I'm also super new to all of this stuff and really incredibly excited about it. I have a couple questions also in a similar vein to who just asked before, but I think that we can apply for track 1 and track 2. We're a charter school in Los Angeles. My first question is, so do we need to be partnering with somebody else? And who would that be? Would I just get in contact with like the LAUSD school district, or that could be?
Great question. Yeah. So my first question for you is, do you know what type of charter school you are? Are you directly funded or locally funded?
We're directly funded.
Directly funded. Perfect. Okay. So yeah, then you're eligible. And for track 1, you're eligible if you're also a school food authority that operates the National School Lunch Program or School Breakfast Program.
We
do. Hi, Mom. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
Oops.
Okay.
Are you going around at all?
Samantha, you're, oh, there we go. Okay. So yes, so you're a directly funded charter school. That's an SFA. You're eligible to apply to track 1. You don't have to partner with, there's no required partnership to apply to track 1. But there is a whole section called Healthy, Equitable, Resilient Food System in the track 1 application. And that in that section, you can receive additional points for your application if you're partnering with food producers who meet any of those food producer funding priority areas.
Right.
So yes, but there are no required partnerships to apply to track 1. There is a section called Project Team, and that's asking you, like, who are the members of your project team? There's a requirement to have at least the school nutrition services director on board and to have a letter of support from them. And then for track 2, that's the one that does have a partnership requirement. So for track 2, as a directly funded charter school, you would need to partner with at least one farm to school support organization. And in the request for applications and in the track 2 application, there's a list of types of organizations that can qualify as a farm to school support organization. It includes nonprofits, it includes food hubs, it includes food producers. So that would be the minimum partnership requirement for track 2. And then also going back to Lainey's great question earlier about the reach of the project for track 2, you would want to make sure that your track 2 project is meaningfully supporting not just your directly funded charter school, but at least you know, one other directly funded charter school, public school district, or county office of education, and that you're really demonstrating how the project is having regional or statewide food system impact. Whereas in track 1, the requirement is just to demonstrate that it's having this impact on your individual school community.
Okay. And just one more kind of, I guess, might be kind of a big question, but so we were lucky enough to have like a full-size industrial kitchen on campus. So we have the space for education. And so basically a huge part of this would be, just to make sure that I'm understanding, is to set up where we have relationships with farmers, we're purchasing directly from them, so that their lunches, their snacks, and a huge part of education of how to utilize this food and why it's important about where it came from is a huge part of the grant, correct?
Yes, both
Yeah.
the local food procurement and the education about farm to school are both, yeah, important components of track 1.
Okay, okay, awesome. Thank you. This is super exciting. So thank you.
Cool, thanks, Trish. Now we'll go to Jazz. Hi, Jazz.
Hi, thank you so much. I am looking at the track 3, and to the point of employing staff, would that include paying a third party, mainly looking at, you know, the workshops and training aspects and also the grant management?
Yeah, so in all 4 funding tracks, contractual costs are allowable. So if for the purpose of your project, you would like to use grant dollars in your proposed budget to contract with a third party to help with your meeting your project objectives, then you can do that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks. Great question. Okay, and then Lainey, Samantha, and Trish, I see your hands are still raised. Do you have follow-ups, or are you good for now? Good for now. Okay.
I did have one question about the letters of support. So for track 1, if we're partnering with small farms, do you want them to also write a letter of support as partners?
That's a great question. It's not required, but you're welcome to if you would like to. The only required letter of support for track 1 is from the School Nutrition Services Director or equivalent at your organization. And beyond that, you're welcome to upload additional if you would like to.
Okay, great. And for track 2, do you have a preference that the district superintendent write the letter, or could it be like an assistant superintendent?
Good question. So for track 2, we don't require a letter of support from the superintendent this year. We did last year, but this year we require a letter of support from the person in charge of your organization's school nutrition services department, or any school nutrition services departments that are part of your project. So because we learned that it was so crucial to have that person on board when we're talking about farm to school and building these connections between cafeteria, classroom, and community. So if you would like to in track 2, similarly to track 1, you're welcome to upload additional letters of support, like from the superintendent or assistant superintendent, but the requirement at the district level is from that school nutrition services director.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, and then feel free to raise your hand if you would like to ask your question aloud, but now I'll start going through the chat. So thanks everyone so much for your patience. So let's see, I see Forrest's question. Hi, Forrest. I'm looking at the eligibility decision tree. People's Self-Help Housing is a 501c3 nonprofit, which in part operates Camino Scholars. Camino Scholars is an education program providing academic support to students after each of the 180 school days and during academic breaks to students in K-8. The program also partners with the Santa Maria-Bonita School District. Is ASES maybe after school program to provide services to Santa Maria students? Would this mean we qualify solely for track 3? That's a great question, Forrest. So track 3 is if your project is primarily serving children age 0 through 5. So if you're serving students K through 8, track 3, which is the Farm to Early Care and Education program, doesn't sound like it would be the right fit unless you're also serving a lot of 0 through 5-year-olds. But for your project, it sounds like you as a nonprofit working with a K-8 school district on farm to school might be more of a farm to school support organization in track 2, which is that regional or statewide farm to school partnership grant. But the thing to keep in mind for that is not just about serving one school district community. It's about making that regional or statewide food system impact. So if that's the focus of a project, then track 2 is a good fit. But if the focus of the project is to make farm to school impact on one K-8 or K-12 school district community, then it could be a good opportunity for the school district itself to apply in track 1. And then you as their partner, they could write you in as a contractor if they would like to, and they could integrate you into the project that way and pay you contractor dollars to help support their project that's going to serve their individual community. And feel free to raise your hand or add more to the chat if I didn't fully answer the question or if you have a follow-up question. And then, oh, yay, you're welcome, Forrest. Thanks for coming. And then Sherry, hi Sherry, I see your question. Oh, perfect segue. It's about contractors. So you asked, I have questions about including outside contractors on a grant proposal for track 1. What kind of documentation are we required to provide for contractors we work with who will provide garden education, salaries and benefits, and physical garden support, materials and supplies? Is our invoice to the contractor or our payment to them sufficient? Or do we have to provide supporting documents like time logs for each educator, along with salary and benefits breakdowns and itemized receipts for their purchases on our farm to school invoices? So this is a great question. So in terms of the application itself, you just tell us in the application, you know, if you know of the contractor you're working with or that you're going to be working with contractors, you would just share that in the application. You would share that in your proposed budget. You would share that in your project work plan. And then it seems like your question is asking, like, beyond that, if you receive a grant award and then you're submitting invoicing to get reimbursed as your project goes on, what kind of documentation are we looking for? That's a really good question. What we have learned over this pilot year of the grant program is that contractors typically need to provide very similar financial documentation as grant recipients do. So like all allowable and unallowable costs of the grant program that apply to grant recipients also apply to contractors. And in terms of financial documentation, from our perspective, we're looking for, you know, like, how are the dollars being spent? and is the documentation we're receiving explaining that? So that's something we can work with you on kind of case by case as you're getting contractors, and we can make sure to provide really clear guidance when we're doing orientations for grant recipients before the grant term starts, because it might kind of depend on the types of expenses that contractors are having. But I would think that if a contractor is, buying materials and supplies, like the receipts might be helpful. If a contractor is, working like 50% full-time equivalent or something on the grant project, then we would probably want to know like what they're doing during those hours. And yes, so I don't know if that was a super clear response, but it's definitely something we can help grant recipients with once we get to the point of like establishing grant agreements and doing grant orientations. All right, and then next question. Hi, Isabel, is this grant a reimbursement grant? Yes, so the default for this grant program is that it is a reimbursement grant program, which means that you submit invoices to the CDFA either monthly or quarterly, outlining your grant expenses over that past month or quarter and seeking reimbursement from the state. There is an option for advance payment if eligible. So if that's something that your organization is interested in to see if you're eligible, then that's something that once the grant agreements are getting put in place and grant awards are announced, that we can work with grant recipients on. And there are some advance payment regulations that we link to in the request for applications that are important to keep in mind if advance payment sounds like something that you might be interested in. But in short, yes, it's a reimbursement grant by default, and advance payment may be an option if you're eligible and if you can follow those advance payment regulations. Okay, that's a great question. And then Julie, let's see. Oh, great. That was your question from earlier about hydroponics. So I'm going to move on from there. Samantha, is there a definition of criteria terms? Yes, that's a great question. All of the review criteria for each track is on our website. Rachel might even be able to link to it if we have those links handy. There's a separate document on our website with the review criteria for each funding track. And then it's 2 o'clock, so if you have to go, it was so wonderful to have you. Feel free to jump off, but we'll stick around and get through these questions. And if you have to leave early, they'll be in the recording that we post online, so you can refer back to them there. Okay, Claire. Hi, Claire. So you asked, in our track 2 application, there's a question about the producers that we plan to and or do work with. When the question says, please describe the producers with whom you plan to partner who meet any of the above criteria, is this just looking for us to say our producers meet the criteria, or does it want specific profiles of each producer? I think more of the latter, because you want to demonstrate to the external reviewers that your producers meet the criteria. So the question before that description question is more of the one that's asking, do your producer partners meet this criteria? And then you check the boxes if they do. So that's more where you're saying yes or no. But then the question that's asking for you to describe your producer partners who meet the criteria, that's the opportunity to demonstrate that they do, so that the external reviewers can score based on that. So I think the more detail there, the better to show how the producers meet that criteria. Okay, and then that's a great question. And now another question in the chat, and this one was directly to me, is plate waste covered on this grant? Example, helping schools reduce waste from the cafeteria. That's a great question. Yes, that would be an allowable cost under this grant program, as long as you can show how it's relating to the goals of the funding track that you're applying to. So if you're wanting to use grant funds for plate waste, it should be relating back to your farm to school goals and the goals of the funding track in order to be in line with the grant program. And let's see. Next one is from Curtis. Hi again, Curtis. With regard to contractors for farm labor, do we need to go through a competitive process, or can we just name the contractor in the application? That's a really good question. So for contractors, we can put a link in the chat to the CDFA grant administrative regulations, and there's some sections in there that talk about contracting as a grant recipient. The first line, I think, says that you have to follow your own internal procedures for contracting. And in lieu of that, you would follow the procedures that this document outlines. And then there's some other requirements about like having a written agreement and some things like that. So, so we'll put that link in the chat, and those would be the guidelines to follow for contracting. And in terms of the application, you don't have to like write about your process for finding a contractor necessarily in the application. You can just name them and share about, you know, what their role will be in the project and how much they'll be, how much you'll be allocating to them in the proposed budget. And thank you so much, Rachel. You're saving me in the chat with all those links. Thank you. So Rachel just put in that link. And if you just kind of filter for your search for contracting, then you'll probably find those sections that I was chatting about. And let's see, I think that's all the questions I see. So thank you so much for joining, for bringing your questions. If you have any others, feel free, we'll stick around for a few more minutes, but otherwise hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we hope to see you back here next week at the next webinar.